Hello, Brightsiders! Do you know what's hidden inside President Lincoln's head or at the Grand Station Terminal in New York? Today, I will reveal secrets about America's best-known landmarks you have never heard of. At the towering granite faces of Mount Rushmore, there's a hidden chamber inside President Lincoln's head, built initially to hold essential documents from US history. The original plan was to create a much larger carving of several vital moments in American history. Unfortunately, it was far too complicated to be completed, and a Hall of Records was chosen instead. The construction stopped for many years with the room left unfinished. However, the project was revived in late 90s and they completed the chamber. The hidden room tells the US's story to future generations, a time capsule of American history. Sadly, tourists can't access the secret room as it's too difficult to reach. Anyone running through the Grand Central Terminal to get to their train on time knows that you work up quite a sweat. Some hidden Manhattanites are also working up a sweat somewhere else at the station. Few commuters realize that the Grand Central Terminal has been home to a tennis club for decades. It mainly serves local sports fans and corporate groups, so most people don't even know it exists. Vanderbilt Tennis Club is located on the station's upper levels and includes a full gymnasium, one full-sized indoor hard court, and even a junior court. While it might seem strange to join, the Tennis and Fitness Club is quite popular among the locals. Most of the Supreme Court building is what you'd expect: courtrooms, offices, and other generally dull workspaces. But that's until you get to the 5th floor. The building has a hidden basketball court, nicknamed the highest court in the land. This court is frequented by many of the building's workers. The room was initially designed as a storage space, but some people started turning it into a makeshift court to practice their tennis game. The trend took off, and eventually it turned into a basketball court we know today. One of the most fascinating things about Niagara Falls is how naturally falling water is used to generate energy. The falls had slowed to a trickle or even stopped because of freezing and ice on several occasions. But a little known secret of the falls is that they can be turned off. And in 1969, the US Army Corps of Engineers did just that. To generate hydroelectric power, engineers developed ways to control the water's flow and fall to get the most out of it. All this water causes lots of erosion, so a facelift was planned. Unfortunately, the plan ended up being a bit of a failure. Meanwhile, this lady is no failure. She's an icon, a symbol of hope, and one of the most recognizable figures in the world. And she wears size 879 shoes. The Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable structures in the USA and in the world. In 1886, the monument wasn't just symbolic. For 16 years, the statue functioned as a fully operational lighthouse. Tourists at the US landmark can head to her crown for a stunning city view, but there used to be a room in the torch that could be accessed. Unfortunately, the ladder to the torch room was damaged by a shockwave from a nearby explosion, making the room inaccessible from 1916 until today. And it hasn't welcomed any visitors since. When the Brooklyn Bridge was first under construction, the engineers faced two significant problems. Well, the city didn't have enough money to pay for the whole project. That's a first. And local wineries were refusing to relocate out of the path of the construction. The engineer managed to find a great solution to both problems. They helped finance the bridge by building wine cellars and renting them out to local businesses that needed the extra storage. That's a pretty genius approach to financing a bridge, actually. Today, the city of New York has taken ownership of the cellars and stripped the caverns of their original functionality. Now, they are primarily unused and full of maintenance equipment. Disneyland has fast become one of the most famous landmarks in America. Hardcore fans might think they know all of the park's secrets, but some might even surprise regular parkgoers. Hidden behind an unmarked door in Disneyland's New Orleans Square, you can find a posh, expensive restaurant called Club 33. If dining here is on your to-do list for your next vacation, you better start saving your money right now. The price to enter is a little expensive, costing around $25,000 to join, plus an annual fee of $12,000. If you feel wrong about never being a part of Club 33, maybe this will cheer you up. The waiting list can be up to 14 years long, and even Walt Disney himself never got to see it. The Golden Gate Bridge was once the world's longest suspension bridge. This eye-catching 1.7-mile-long feat of engineering was completed in 1937. While many people know that the bridge is constantly being repainted, did you know that the paint color, which looks red, is called International Orange? Interestingly, the color was just a primer, but it turned out to be quite visible through the thick fog. The bridge's original color plan was suggested to be black with yellow stripes to maximize its visibility for passing ships. That's quite an ugly combination, I think. Most people who visit the Lincoln Memorial are in awe of the size and view of the reflecting pool. Some even spend all of their energy trying to find the famous typo carved into the walls. In the line, "With high hope for the future," the sculptor mistakenly spelled the future with an E instead of an F. Yet they tried filing it in, but the typo is still visible. Visiting the Gateway Arc to look at the city of St. Louis is like looking back in time. Most visitors don't know that the Arc also provides a glimpse back to its construction. Built to withstand earthquakes and high winds, the Arc can move and bend as much as 18 inches in high winds. The Arc is the tallest national monument in the United States, standing at 630 feet. Few people realize that it's 630 feet wide as well. That's impressive. The most peculiar thing about this spectacular construction isn't just its story, but that it also contains the stories of over 600,000 people from St. Louis. Hidden underneath the deluxe Wolford Astoria Hotel is the secluded platform called Track 61, part of the Grand Central Terminal. A railway car believed to be designed for President Franklin D. Roosevelt was left in the station for decades before being removed. This private train car was able to pull into the underground station where he could come and go unseen by the public. Unfortunately, the car turned out to be just for transporting parts of construction materials, which is not really as cool as transporting a president. The Liberty Bell features one of history's most famous repair jobs. Well, actually, lack of repair jobs. The bell was tested, split, and repaired when first received. And it just got worse from there. After nearly 90 years of use, a narrow crack formed in the Liberty Bell in 1840s. When the city of Philadelphia sought to repair the bell in 1846, metal workers made the crack even worse. Attempts were made to repair the existing rupture in the bell, but it was subsequently fractured beyond repair. After all of this, it had to be taken out of service for good. The bell we see today is just a replica. Not one person alive today has heard the authentic original sound of the bell. That's all for today, and guys, remember, let's learn something new every day together with Brightside.
In 1928, Gloria Farley was a young girl with a big passion for exploration. She grew up in the town of Heavener, Oklahoma, and loved to visit local parks. One day, she found a weird-looking stone that had some bizarre symbols on it. Her fascination with the mysterious writings continued to grow. So, 2 decades later, she returned to study them and made a whole career out of it. See these weird drawings that Gloria stumbled upon back then? They're officially called runes, and they were a system of writing used by Vikings, an ancient Scandinavian people. The word rune itself translates to secret word or secret letter. Runes were made up of different symbols, each representing a different sound or concept. These symbols were carved into stone or wood and were often used for inscriptions and messages. As an important part of Viking culture, they were used everywhere, from spiritual texts to everyday communication. Why are these writings so interesting in the first place? Firstly, because there is no official text that explains the history or creation of the Viking runes. Some Vikings engraved runes onto the trunk of a tree named Yggdrasil. It was a mythical tree in Norse mythology. It was believed to connect the 9 realms of the universe. It's described as a huge ash tree with branches that reach out to all corners of the world. The tree is often depicted with 3 main roots, one on Earth, one more extending into the underworld, and the last one reaching the realm of spirits. It's a symbol of the connection between things and the cyclical nature of life. But this is just folklore. In reality, the origin of runes has not been officially determined yet. Many people even question whether Vikings originally used runes, mostly because they think Vikings acquired their knowledge of runes during their travels. We know that Vikings traveled to many different places throughout their history. They started in Scandinavia, then went on to visit the rest of Europe, including the British Isles, France, Germany, and Italy. Some even reached the northern parts of Africa and certain regions of Central Asia, going as far as the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. But there's another theory about Vikings and their travels that continues to baffle historians. Did Vikings actually discover America? Well, for starters, America was not discovered by anyone. The landmass of North and South America had been inhabited by indigenous peoples for thousands of years before the arrival of European explorers. But the first known European to reach the Americas was Christopher Columbus, who arrived at the Bahamas in 1492. So, why do some people believe Vikings might have gotten there first? We have to travel back to the 19th century, when the idea that the Norse were the first Europeans to discover America took off. This belief was based on runes and Norse artifacts found in different areas in the U.S. That cobblestone path, first discovered by Gloria Farley, located in Heavener Runestone Park in Oklahoma, seems to tell the same story. To this day, this slab is one of the biggest historical mysteries in the U.S. Some believe that the runes on the stone were carved by Norse explorers in 1000 CE. At one point in her career, Gloria even reached out to the Smithsonian Institution and found out that they had already concluded in 1923 that the symbols had indeed been from a Scandinavian language. They translated to Nomedal, or gnome and dal, which in turn translated to Sundial Valley, or Monument Valley. This information answered the question of what language the symbols belonged to, but left 2 other questions unanswered. Who carved the symbols, and when were they carved? During her professional life, Gloria collaborated with specialists in Norse history, geology, and epigraphy. She collected evidence that backed up her theory that Vikings had explored North America and could have easily navigated shallow rivers and creeks in their longboats. Though it may seem unlikely, it's not impossible that Vikings once sailed down the Mississippi River. In fact, Viking runestones have been found in various places all over North America, including Minnesota and Maine. In Oklahoma, Researchers have discovered 6 of these runestones in total, though their validity is still uncertain. One Norse settlement, L'Anse aux Meadows in Canada, has been confirmed to date back to 1021 CE. This supports the idea of the Viking activity in North America during the estimated period of time of the Heavener runestone. The Heavener runestone's age cannot be determined through traditional scientific methods like carbon dating or organic material decay rate analysis. Therefore, researchers started to look for other evidence, like Viking artifacts or any other signs of their activity in the area. But none has been found to this day. That's why Vikings really visiting Oklahoma is a subject still up for debate. We can't finish our story about the Viking runes without mentioning the Futhark, which is a 16-letter alphabet. It was the basis for the earliest runic inscriptions that date back to around 200 BCE. At that time, the alphabet consisted of 24 letters. By 800 BCE, the number of letters was reduced to 16. The use of runes continued until the Middle Ages. Inscriptions on stone and wood were made with regular runes, while a different version of the alphabet was used for everyday messages on wood or bone. Runes were also commonly used on objects like combs to identify the owner. In the Viking culture, runes were used to honor brave fighters and heroes on memorial stones, such as the famous Jellingstone in Jutland, Denmark. These stones were placed in public areas for all to see and had a big impact on the local culture. Runes weren't the only interesting part of the Viking heritage. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings were actually known for their cleanliness. Excavations of Viking sites have revealed that they had access to grooming tools such as tweezers, razors, combs, and ear cleaners. Additionally, they were known to bathe regularly, often taking advantage of natural hot springs for their hygiene routine. This was in stark contrast to the hygiene habits of other Europeans at the time. They also had a knack for winter sports, which is not surprising given the Scandinavian weather. At least 6,000 years ago, Scandinavians created primitive skis, though it's believed that Asians may have invented them earlier. During the Viking Age, Norse people used skis for transportation, and also for fun. They even had a spirit protector of skiing named Ullr, who was revered by Vikings. Vikings even had their own beauty standards, which were very important to them. Viking men who were not naturally blonde would use a strong soap with a high lye content to lighten their hair and conform to their culture's beauty standards. In some cases, beards were also lightened. These treatments may have also helped with another delicate issue of the time, that of head lice. Vikings were also known for their powerful ships, which were crucial to their expansion strategy. Their most commonly used boats were longboats, which could carry up to 60 people and were designed for easy docking and departure. Viking ships were typically made of wood, with the hull constructed using overlapping planks held together by iron rivets. The ships were powered by both sails and oars, and were often decorated with intricate carvings and animal figureheads. The reasons behind Vikings traveling almost everywhere in the world are not well understood. One theory suggests that their raiding trips were a result of limited opportunities in Scandinavia, including a lack of farmland and the practice of fathers leaving all their property to their oldest son. This left younger sons with no inheritance and no chance of finding land on their own, making them go on Viking explorations. Another theory is that there was an imbalance in the population of Scandinavia, with too many men and not enough women. This may have led Vikings to not only go searching for foreign treasures, but also to attract women as wives during their travels.
It was hot in the tropics, a type of heat unknown to the men aboard the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria ships, led by Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. It had been months since these men left their home cities in Europe, and until then, Europe was all they knew. They were given a difficult and even dangerous task. Spain hired Columbus to find a new western route to Asia. They needed new routes for trading and buying spices, but it was far from a simple job. I mean, crossing the ocean never is. Little did those sailors know that their lives were about to change forever. "Land in sight!" someone must have shouted on board. But when they finally stepped on that new foreign land, they discovered they were not in Asia. They had landed in the Americas. You've probably heard this tale before. Historically speaking, Columbus arrived in the Americas in 1492. But what would have happened if Columbus's ship had faced a lethal storm in the Atlantic Ocean and had never made it to the new land? What would today's history look like? First things first, nobody discovered anything. When we say that the Americas were discovered, we're kind of ignoring the millions of people who already lived there. You see, the Americas were only discovered from Europe's point of view. Columbus would only have discovered something if when he got there, he was faced with acres and acres of empty land. But that was not the case at all. Second, Columbus was not the first explorer to land in the Americas. Believe it or not, the Vikings approached American shores in the 10th century. Their expeditions have been well documented and accepted by scholars. Here's what might have happened. Around the year 1000 CE, Viking explorer Leif Erikson sailed to a place called Vinland. Cute name, huh? It's now a region in Canada called Newfoundland. But his crew didn't stay too long. They arrived to find 10 Native Americans napping under their overturned canoes. They attempted some trade, but I'm guessing the Vikings weren't too friendly and the Americans didn't really like them. The Vikings' account of the encounter shows they felt outnumbered and menaced, so they sailed away back to their land. That makes sense, right? As I said earlier, there were millions of people living in the ginormous continent of the Americas. Any foreigner would be outnumbered there. Now take a look at what North America looked like before our buddy Chris got there. It was not divided into the normal states we're used to. And if Columbus had never arrived, the United States would probably never have been united to begin with. After all, there were hundreds of first Americans living in these lands, and they lived amongst their own tribes, quite different from the Europeans. It's not accurate to think that there were no political systems going on in the Americas before Europeans arrived. We just need to understand that they were different from what we're used to today. When Europeans arrived, they imported their belief systems with them, from religious beliefs and language systems to things as simple as clothing habits. If the Americas had developed on their own, maybe their sense of fashion would be completely different today. You see, Europeans had a developed sense of fashion by the time they arrived in the West. They wore things such as this and this. But those don't really work in the tropics, do they? For them, fashion had to do with showing a certain economic status, while in the Americas, that didn't exist. For Native Americans, clothing was mainly functional and related to the weather. In warmer climates, Native people would wear short-like cloths to cover their intimate parts. They would walk bare-chested and use shoes known as moccasins. Yes, similar to the moccasins you probably own. In colder climates, they would resort to using leather and fur parkas. Of course, there was always the special clothing used for ceremonial purposes. So I'm guessing that if Columbus never reached the Americas, brands such as the Gap, Hollister, and Forever 21 would have never existed. But we could live with that, couldn't we? Here's a wild thought. Let's say that by the 1700s, Native Americans had developed complex engineering skills. They built big boats, maybe a bit smaller in size than the traditional European ships, and decided to venture across the ocean. Let's say they were the ones who arrived on European shores, in places such as Spain and Portugal. They carried gifts and goods with them for trading, of course. This was also a common practice amongst them back home, known as potlatch. Sure, they were received with suspicion by the Europeans, who had only ever traded with Asia. But with this inverted encounter, a different type of relationship began between Native Americans and Europeans. Since Europeans didn't claim ownership of the Americas, the people from the so-called New Land weren't considered inferior to them. Actually, they stood side by side as equals, each one with their own power and set of knowledge. Native Americans taught Europeans a new type of ruling system, a more decentralized one. So modern-day structures of government would look really different. Maybe Europeans decided that 4 years was a long time for someone to hold decision power, so they implemented smaller and more frequent elections. Oh, and the landscape of European cities also changed a lot. Instead of huge statues made of copper and bronze showing men in ships on their way to the Americas, the Europeans built totem poles in honor of their alliances with first Americans. In terms of medical and medicinal knowledge, they had a lot to exchange about. While Europeans were making advances in traditional medicine, Americans had developed an impressive knowledge of herbs that could heal a series of things. Before they knew it, Europeans were selling different varieties of plants in their pharmaceutical establishments. They had one big barrier though: language. Since Europeans never arrived on American shores, they also never taught their language to Americans. So maybe in this scenario, both cultures brought in their best linguists and tried creating a new language from scratch. Something that could be comprehensible from both perspectives and that could encompass both of their worldviews. The implications of this on modern-day life would be really profound if you stop to think about it. Let's say that this newly created language involved some symbols and drawings in it. You see, Native Americans often told stories using symbols known as pictograms. They were quite literal sometimes. As you can see, a mountain was represented by, well, a mountain. It's crazy to think that this system of communication has been around for 5,000 years, since it was actually invented by the Sumerians. And hey, maybe even our laptop keyboards would come equipped with these symbols, and you could write more visually hybrid and fun emails than the ones you write today. The American landscape would have also changed. You see, if neither Columbus nor any of the other European dudes that went after him reached the so-called New Land, Central and Latin American cities would look completely different than they do today. Maybe the bustling empires of the time, such as the Inca, the Maya, and the Aztec, would have grown immensely. To be fair, they were already pretty big by the time Europeans got there. Some pre-Columbian Maya cities were as big as medieval London and Paris in terms of population. But oh my, the Mayan Empire would have grown so much that it could have spread out all over of Central America. They could have developed their pyramid building craft up to the point that they managed to build an even larger pyramid than the Giza pyramid in Egypt. So tourists would come from all over the world to visit. And in South America, let's just say the region could have turned into a huge forest, bigger than the Amazon. The Inca could have spread through the Andes and then into the mainland. Places such as Brazil and Argentina never existed. But in their place, there would have been dreamy tropical settlements, which would have become a worldwide reference in sustainable living.